You are listening to the global network of podcasters dedicated to the pharmacy profession. Welcome to the PharMD Podcast Network.
You're listening to the NASP Podcast. This specialty pharmacy podcast is a collaboration with the National Association of Specialty Pharmacy and the PharMD Podcast Network. The mission of the National Association of Specialty Pharmacy is to improve specialty pharmacy practice by promoting continuing professional education and certification of specialty pharmacists while advocating for public policies that ensure patient access to specialty medications. As the healthcare industry's leading podcast dedicated to the pharmacy profession, the PharMD Podcast Network is proud to bring our listeners the NASP Podcast, in collaboration with the National Association of Specialty Pharmacy.
Hello, my name is Sheila Arquette, and I am the President and CEO of the National Association of Specialty Pharmacy. I am delighted to welcome two very special guests, Dr. Bridgette Kanz Schroader and Laurie Fayzio. Bridgette Kanz Schroader, PharmD, MPA, BCOP, is an Associate Director within the Medical Affairs Strategy and Publications team at Market Access and Healthcare Consulting, part of Cencora. In this role, she leads a team focused on medical affairs initiatives, including medical information dissemination, planning and execution, strategic support, and content development. Additionally, she collaborates on global health economics and outcomes research activities, including protocol development and review, and provision of clinical context for real-world evidence generation activities, health economics and outcomes research, road mapping, and content development of Academy of Managed Care Pharmacy formulary dossiers, global value dossiers, advisory board training slide decks, and scientific publications. Before joining Cencora, Dr. Schroader was a clinical pharmacy specialist at the Markey Cancer Center at the University of Kentucky in Lexington. She serves as a medical oncology clinical specialist in their ambulatory clinic and as a preceptor to students, residents, and medical fellows. Her research and publication interests focus on immunotherapy and checkpoint inhibition. Dr. Schroader received her Doctor of Pharmacy and Master of Public Health Administration degrees in 2014 from the University of Kentucky. She completed 2 years of residency at Vanderbilt University Medical Center in Nashville, Tennessee. She has been a board-certified oncology pharmacist since 2017. Laurie Fayzio is Head Manufacturer Strategy at FormularyDecisions. Laurie leads their business development team in developing and executing sales strategies and tactics to enhance the FormularyDecisions business. She collaborates with manufacturer subscribers to ensure FormularyDecisions meets and continues to evolve with their payer engagement and data insights needs. Prior to the acquisition of FormularyDecisions by Cencora, formerly AmerisourceBergen, Laurie led the Market Access Technologies team, including the Custom Software Solutions Group at Dymaxium since 2000. Her experience began at a large health benefit consulting firm. She subsequently joined a PBM, where she helped employers and insurance companies manage complex and diverse healthcare formulary issues. Laurie later joined a large biopharmaceutical manufacturer, where she spearheaded their strategies to enhance the company's presence and image within the private sector. She is a frequent speaker at payer and manufacturer conferences and webinars. Her understanding of both the market access environment, unmet needs of manufacturers and payers, and the application of state-of-the-art technologies ensures customers achieve their key business objectives. Laurie is a graduate of Western University with a Bachelor of Science in Mathematics and Statistics, focused on actuarial science. Bridgette and Laurie, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having us.
So let's start with, what are the key components of an effective digital engagement strategy for biopharma companies in the pharmaceutical industry? And why is that important?
This means not having only a one point in time engagement that might be tied around a significant milestone, such as product approval, but one that builds over time and ensures that there's a continuum of communication digitally. And when we think of a strong digital engagement strategy, it really is one that gets involved with healthcare decision maker customers early and often throughout the commercialization process, so that you are ensuring that your customers have the information they need to make informed formulary placement decisions to ultimately get the right treatments to patients in a timely manner. And when I think of biopharma companies and their timeline, it can really be broken down into three main components: pre-approval, approval, and launch. I'll put those two together, and then post-approval. And our experience has shown that healthcare decision makers need different information at each of these time periods. And it's really important that biopharma companies are reaching them with what they need when they need it. In fact, as a best practice, we share the importance of curating your audience early so that a biopharma subscriber can sustain engagement and keep healthcare decision makers informed throughout the product's life cycle by continuing to raise awareness of the latest and greatest information.
Yeah, Laurie, that's exactly it. And I think, before we get much further, Laurie and I have also been asked by our legal team to make sure that our listeners know they should do their own research in making decisions related to the content we're discussing today. So I promised them I'd say that. So now I have. And so building on that, I want to go into a little more detail about what Laurie was mentioning around that pre-approval, approval, and post-approval phases. And really that pre-approval time period occurs up to 2 years prior to launch. And what we focus on during that time period is building engagement to ensure that healthcare decision makers are aware of where to go to obtain, the latest information on the product as well as the disease state. So we're really building a product story at that time. And this can include a wide variety of topics like the patient journey, burden of illness, disease state. But for the most part, our pre-approval stage really focuses on the unmet needs and highlighting that in a population of interest. And I, want to call out for our listeners here at NASP, this could be as simple as explaining that like a product is an oral formulation and a biopharma company expects that it'll be distributed through a specialty pharmacy. So that's something that would be really important to know and valuable to know up front for planning purposes. And really then as we move into the product approval phase, it's important for our healthcare decision makers to receive support with different resources like payer value propositions, prior authorization forms, formulary kits, all these resources that help communicate that key product information to support actual formulary decision-making now that the product's approved. And then, of course, in the post-approval stage, that support needs to be continued. So that could be in the form of additional value demonstration, like using health economics and outcomes research, which we frequently refer to as HEOR. It could include cost effectiveness models or retrospective database studies, as well as comparative effectiveness research.
Yeah, and I think the important point here is that while the information varies over time, it's critical that a biopharma company continue to communicate to that stakeholder audience, particularly because, as we know, therapeutic classes are continually being reevaluated as new products enter the marketplace and or existing products are seeking new indications. So coming up with a digital engagement strategy that provides this thoughtful roadmap, as Bridgette outlines, ensures that these professionals are receiving the most current information, even when biopharma companies may not be connecting with them daily through live interactions.
So what are some examples of like a stakeholder audience? Are we talking about like payers or patients or prescribers? Who are we talking about?
You nailed it, Sheila. We're talking about all the above.
Okay.
And I think that's something that you'll hear Laurie and I talk about throughout the podcast is digital engagement and communication in general starts with understanding your audience. So as Laurie gets more into formulary decisions and focusing on Cencora's digital platform, the main audience there is going to be payers. But in general, throughout the podcast as well, we'll also be thinking about patients as well as healthcare providers. So really encompassing a diverse group of audiences.
Okay. And I'm sure the messaging is quite different, right? Even the way the messaging is structured.
Absolutely. And, one of our big sort of themes that we talk about is meeting the audience where they are. And that really comes into play, especially in digital engagement, finding our audiences, giving them information where they want to receive it, when they want to receive it, and in their preferred format.
Oh, exactly right. There's so much competing for their attention, right? If it doesn't immediately resonate, they're onto something else.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Right. So how can biopharma companies leverage data analytics to enhance their digital engagement efforts with healthcare providers?
I think what's really important here is that it's in the best interest of these biopharma companies to understand if and how their content is being engaged with, since there's a lot of time and money that's invested into the development of these customer-facing pieces. And when I think of the FormularyDecisions platform specifically, we're targeted on, as Bridgette mentioned earlier, the payers, your traditional payers, your health plans, your PBMs, but we also have hospitals, IDNs, health systems, public health systems who are using this platform. And so having access to data analytics, such as what types of content have the most activity, or which of these organization types are accessing the pieces of content they're posting, just to name a few, helps a biopharma company better understand what's important and how it might vary depending on the stakeholder audience, as we mentioned earlier. So for instance, FormularyDecisions captures this data to determine the engagement level of each of those resources that has been shared as posted by our subscribers to the platform. And I think what's really interesting is an analysis that we recently did where we looked at everything that biopharma companies have posted in their curated repositories that they have available to them as a subscriber on the platform, where they can post as much content and as varied content as they want over time, obviously subject to their internal review and approval process. But when we looked at that, what was interesting to note was that what was being accessed most frequently wasn't necessarily what was being posted most frequently. So product information, for example, which I recognize as a broad category that could include anything from pre-approval information exchange decks to known as PI, to billing and coding guides or pricing overviews and more, to health economics and outcomes research and real world evidence. Those had the highest activity by our community of healthcare decision makers, yet clinical trial publications were the most consistently posted resource by our biopharma companies. So you look at that and you simply can't get that information when you send out a file to a customer, right? You're not going to understand how that's being used, if it's being used, where they're going, what they're looking at, how much time they're spending. And I think the analytics really shouldn't just stop at a high level. That should be further broken down by stage, which is what we discussed earlier. That, in pre-approval, at launch, post-approval, what are they looking at? What are they gravitating to? Because we know that changes over time. And then I think to round that out, you want to get feedback on the product or on the information that you're posting so that you can ensure that you're reaching your customers where they are with the information they need when they need it. So the goal really should be to obtain the most comprehensive understanding through both activity metrics and insights via feedback. And that's the power of data analytics and should really be table stakes for any digital engagement strategy.
Yeah. And I think, what you're saying is so important, Laurie, because our current market, the resources are continuously constrained, right? Like, I think we're all facing that no matter what part of the industry you're in. And it's really important that we then take those data analytics and use them. So, Laurie is talking about how we can get these analytics from things we've done in the past. And then what I think about next is how does that inform the future? So those data analytics can really be brought into our biopharma company clients and inform their strategic development, help to prioritize where they're going to put their resources, focusing on what kind of engagement their materials are having, when to develop those, and how to post them and where to share them.
And when we're talking about pre-approval, nothing pre-approval goes to patients. Is that correct?
Yes. In the sense that pre-approval information exchange is a very highly regulated communication piece. So that is strictly for payers. It's not focused on patients. So that's correct. That doesn't mean that patients don't get some type of information about products. Of course, clinicaltrials.gov, publicly available trial results, things of that nature are certainly available. But when we talk about biopharma customers specifically engaging with PI, that is to the payer audience.
Okay.
And I think that's the really nice thing when I think of our platform is that our audience is an audience that is approved in terms of the criteria that they meet. They are an approved audience to receive pre-approval information.
Yeah, that's awesome. In what ways can digital engagement improve communication and collaboration between biopharma companies and their stakeholders?
Yeah, I can take this one, Sheila. So, digital engagement has really evolved to become bi-directional, and that fosters a much more collaborative environment, specifically for us between our biopharma companies and their stakeholders, like the payer audience. And like I mentioned earlier, that one key thing that we emphasize and really talk about continuously in effective communication is meeting our audience where they're at. And I think we can all appreciate that we spend far too much time online, right, as just normal people in our day-to-day. And I think we forget that so do our healthcare decision makers, because at the end of the day, they're also just normal people. So what we've consistently heard over time is they really want information that's easy to access and it's early in the product life cycle. On the other side of the fence, then, our biopharma partners really want to be efficient and they want to be effective with their content development. So it's important to them to understand what kind of information is valuable, which gets back to that data analytics, and when that information is valuable. But it's also equally important to understand how a healthcare decision maker prefers to receive that information so that biopharma can make a plan. I think we've, alluded to it a little bit here, but there's compliance and there's regulation to consider in the background of making sure that we're digitally engaging compliantly and following regulations. So I think that that digital engagement and having that bi-directional feedback is a really great path that we're going down.
And I think that's a good point, Bridgette, because by now biopharma companies certainly should recognize that they need to leverage various channels to meet their stakeholder customers. And digital plays a vital role in that process, but it's not the only role. And a best practice really is to have a strong coordination of effort between the feet on the street, their field teams who are going out and talking to their payer customers, and digital engagement, and then to really leverage those advanced analytics that they receive back through that digital engagement to facilitate field team activation. And what I mean by that is recognizing where their stakeholder customers are engaging with content, but also equally where they may not be engaging with content and where there's an opportunity for the field team to come in and really educate them. So when I look at that, I think it goes a long way in terms of partnership between biopharma companies and their customer stakeholders when they receive the feedback that I mentioned earlier, and then they act upon it to provide what their customers are looking for.
Yeah, absolutely, Laurie. I think one thing that we are more commonly recommending is to have these biopharma companies develop a database of content, right? That can be available for use, tagged to specific audiences with specific audience messaging, again, compliant, in line with regulations. And then they can use that database and update it intentionally to meet the needs of healthcare decision makers. And I think this is a shift that we've seen in the industry over time versus, making one-off pieces for a specific audience, really moving to develop that repository of information that can then be tweaked and changed to meet your audience needs. And I think kind of along those same lines, it's really important that companies create internal standard operating procedures. And these can help provide guidance and really increase the comfort with sharing what's traditionally, live content into digital content. And really making sure that this is consistent and compliant. And this is going to help all of the content creators, so that at each company, they're not asking the same questions every time they're developing and sharing materials. And everyone along the continuum feels just a little bit more comfortable with digital engagement.
So what role do online platforms play in shaping the perception of a manufacturer among healthcare professionals?
So I think it's an interesting question because we're now talking beyond product, but to the manufacturer themselves. And we think of the pandemic. And obviously in the pandemic, we saw a significant shift in terms of all of us and healthcare decision makers included, leveraging online resources. And for this stakeholder audience, they were using that as a way to access the information they needed when in-person simply was not possible. And then post-pandemic, as those of us who work remotely certainly can appreciate, most organizations have shifted from a primarily in-person work environment to one that's hybrid or remote. And when we think about that, and we think about the perception of the manufacturer and meeting them where their customers, where they're at, we think of what the field team is doing and the feedback that they're getting through those live engagements, and then leveraging an online platform to validate what that field team is hearing. And in many cases, as subscribers have told me, they use that to monitor the perception of them as a manufacturer overall in terms of that partnership. One of the other things that we think about is that a significant time reviewing digital resources in comparison to non-digital ones has come out as a consistent theme. And there was external research that was done that showed that 80% of healthcare decision makers prefer to access information digitally. So it's important for biopharma companies as a partner to have a footprint in that channel as well.
And I want to jump in on that, Laurie, because I do think that that data is so important. And building on that, 87% of decision makers also said that they prefer either a combination of traditional and digital communication channels or for there to be more in-person meetings. So we're hearing both, right? Like our healthcare decision makers want to be able to access that information digitally, but they don't want to lose the human touch. And I think that's really key for our manufacturer, our biopharma partners to hear, because it's still really important that they're engaging with these stakeholders in a variety of ways. And I think what that means is our biopharma partners have to have effective engagement in a multi-channel approach. So it allows those decision makers to have the flexibility in how they consume information, where and when it's most applicable for them. And I think digital platforms, like you said, Laurie, can really serve as that complement to in-person engagement. It allows the decision makers to go back and revisit content. They've got it at their fingertips. They don't have to reach out, but they still have, contacts at our biopharma companies, and they still have relationships. And I think that this really shows that the perception of a manufacturer is important. And that manufacturers are willing to evolve with the times, right? Like they're trying to do research to understand what their audiences want and what information they need. And I think they're really willing to try new things. And I think all of those things resonate with our decision makers and impact the perception of the biopharma customer.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's important to have that coordination, right, between doing live and doing digitally, and ensure that they're sharing the insights more broadly across the organization so that they can continue to enhance that partnership.
Absolutely. I think one of the buzzwords I really appreciate right now is a surround sound approach. So making, right, it's kind of cool, making sure, and that's what we're hearing. The decision makers want things in a variety of ways. So we've talked a lot about FormularyDecisions, which is Cencora's digital platform, and that's more of a closed system. So our users are validated to, again, make sure that that audience is following regulations and we're communicating in a compliant way that our manufacturers don't have to worry about as much. But there are other platforms, right? Like we think about social media platforms that are more professional, Doximity, LinkedIn. These can really also be used to share information or entice healthcare decision makers to either reach out directly to the biopharma company for those more traditional in-person engagements, or on the flip side, to be more engaged with FormularyDecisions. And even more so when we're thinking about more of these open systems, it's really important to have internal alignment on the logistics of how you use these systems and the logistics of the posts, and consider different options. So, for example, a lot of our biopharma companies struggle with, like, are we going to allow comments on social media posts? Because that opens a can of worms of potential information that they have to monitor and they have to respond to. So that's important to consider. And then on the flip side, if you are putting this effort and time and resource into using these other platforms, you have to have some way to measure success. So thinking about, what type of performance indicators are you going to monitor and use to determine what engagement that post has generated?
Yeah, absolutely. And online platforms such as ours of FormularyDecisions, which, as Bridgette mentioned, is a closed platform only for validated healthcare decision makers, offers the flexibility and then can serve as this consolidated portal where healthcare professionals can conveniently access resources from a wide variety of biopharma companies and products, as well as third-party sources, as opposed to having to navigate to multiple resources. And I recognize that biopharma companies also find value in having their own payer portals, and I definitely support that. I think thinking of multiple channels, having formulary decisions is another one to consider, because we already know that healthcare decision makers are coming here as a trusted third-party source. And plus, as Bridgette mentioned earlier, we verify that they meet the FDA definition of a payor when they register, and certainly before they have access to the platform. And then we ensure that they reactivate their access every 6 months. And this gives confidence to our biopharma company subscribers that they can share information in this platform and know it's reaching the audience that meets the compliance needs. And then feedback from our community, our healthcare decision maker community, has generally been favorable, with many recognizing that the platform's comprehensive approach to information sharing it creates a multifaceted approach for them to have so many resources available. And I think pharma companies recognize that their participation in this closed, secure platform demonstrates partnership, which goes a long way with their customers and a willingness to meet them where they are.
Absolutely. I think that really ties it back to Sheila's question, right? Like, by participating in digital engagements, I think biopharma companies in general are saying they understand, healthcare decision makers are really busy. They have a lot of demands for their time, and they want to evolve. They want to provide the data that these decision makers need in an easily accessible format. And they want to make sure that they have their information so they can conduct product reviews, just talk about reimbursement, and make sure that those contracting decisions are done in as time efficient a manner as possible.
So do you think, did COVID, is this a result of COVID? Did COVID accelerate, right, this I guess, need and acceptance of digital engagement?
Well, when I think back to when we launched Formulary Decisions in 2010, there was a recognition on the part of the Academy of Managed Care Pharmacy that the old way of doing things, sharing a dossier by sending out a binder, just really wasn't the way anymore. And so I think that started a change in terms of how to share information. We've seen an increase engagement over time. I will say it was accelerated as a result of COVID, but interestingly enough, when we look at just the last 5 years, so going up to ending in 2023, I think we saw an 8-fold increase in engagement, and that just continues to grow. So I do agree with you. I think COVID played a role, but I think it was more about accelerating this as opposed to something that was started and everyone was recognizing there was a need for it, and we're only going to continue to evolve with that.
100%. And I think when we then considered those additional audiences, like our healthcare providers that are seeing patients every day and patients themselves, I think COVID definitely accelerated like their need for digital engagement, right? We've got these sort of exaggerated social platforms now, like TikTok, where honestly, doctors are talking to patients on TikTok.
Oh my Lord.
I know, but it's really cool. Like, it provides this just absolutely untapped educational potential. And I think what COVID did was make some biopharma companies really have that reckoning. I think, as Laurie said, communicating with payers in a digital way has been coming for a long time. I think where biopharma companies have been able to draw the line is communicating digitally with providers and patients, because they just lose so much control of the communication platform and of the resource. But COVID really forced that conversation to come back to the forefront. And I think we're seeing companies develop standard operating procedures to participate, because they just understand that there's such an opportunity to put out, unbranded disease state education. It does not have to be product specific. At the end of the day, we are all patient centric, and we're trying to create a better healthcare space. And I think that there's so many opportunities now. So I do think COVID allowed biopharma companies to reprioritize that. And I think in my world, in the med affairs space, we're seeing it in the form of digital opinion leaders, where we used to really only focus on key opinion leaders, which were providers that were influencing a disease space or influencing treatment guidelines. And now we've got to also consider digital opinion leaders. So what are these TikTok docs talking to patients about? And, who's following them? Healthcare providers, patients, there's just such a diversity out there. And I think COVID's allowing us to bring that back to the forefront.
Sure. Yeah. And I think the push to go green, right? Like probably when formulary decisions are in 2010 when it went live, right? And I remember like the dossiers, and then I remember like the P&T packets as well. And then I've heard, through COVID, right, that all went digital as well. But I remember lugging that around and, printing 30 copies of that. And so yeah, I think, COVID was the accelerator of that, which is a good thing, right? We don't need all here. So how can biopharma companies ensure that their digital engagement strategies comply with all the industry regulations and guidelines?
Well, we know that digital solutions provide this really unique opportunity for rapid, essentially real-time sharing of resources and generation of insights. And due to the fast-moving nature of this process, biopharma companies really need to ensure that their practices still fall in line with the FDA guidance, particularly when thinking about what is appropriate to convey during pre-approval, because it is very strict and focused. And it's important when we speak of pre-approval, in addition to what they are sharing, to ensure that they have a communication mechanism in place to connect with those healthcare decision makers who have accessed earlier content with updated information once it becomes available, because that is a requirement as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, what's really important here when we talk about digital engagement and digital resources, it's that it's not different, right? So we really need to intentionally track these resources just as you would track engaging face-to-face with a healthcare decision maker or other audience, and making sure that we're following all of the guidance that applies there. So reporting adverse events in a timely manner, if product quality issues are reported, making sure that those are reported in a timely manner as well. So that's what scared biopharma companies away in the past, because it does take some time and investment up front to ensure you're set up for success. But again, with a little bit of effort, a little bit of standard operating procedures dropped in there, digital engagement can be done efficiently and compliantly. So I think an example would be that, like, making sure information communicated is scientifically sound and presented within the correct context. So, if you're presenting the prevalence of a disease state, you need to present, how that was estimated, or how the incidence of an adverse event was derived within an economic model. So making sure that those steps that you would take when you're presenting these resources live, you're taking those steps just a slightly different manner when you're doing these things digitally. And I think ultimately our biopharma companies should exercise oversight, right? Again, work instructions, standard operating procedures, anything that they would have had in place for other communication venues, do it for your digital engagement. And that will make sure that your digital strategies are intentionally compliant, just like any of your other communication strategies.
So what are some innovative tools or technologies that biopharma companies can use to enhance their digital engagement? There's so much, right, happening with technology and AI, and what are some of these tools and technologies they should consider?
AI was exactly where I was going, Sheila. When we look towards the future and AI emerges as a key player, and we all hear about AI and how it's being used in many different ways, good and bad, both for personal and professional purposes. And when I think of us, and specifically the FormularyDecisions platform, we're exploring how we can compliantly integrate AI into our platform. And this would help to facilitate meaningful interactions between both our users, who are healthcare decision makers, and a biopharma company subscribers. So what does that mean? I don't think we really know yet what role AI might be incorporated into our platform, right? We haven't fully thought that through. It could be as simple as, and I say simple because I'm not the one developing it, it could be as simple as benefiting our users to help them synthesize all of the information that's available to them, both what they can collect publicly and is available to them within the platform, and biopharma curated content that they can only get through the platform or directly through the manufacturer themselves, without them needing to pull all of that information together themselves. Said another way, we hope to be the AI that healthcare decision makers are using. And when I think on the flip side, and I think of our biopharma company subscribers, AI might be leveraged in a way to weave those activity metrics and feedback together to quickly identify trends or consistent themes that they may need to address so that it can be done more real time. The beauty of AI is that it can pull so much information together so that individuals can digest it faster. But we don't know yet if, how, or when it will be incorporated. But I will say that we do know we will do so thoughtfully and with compliance in mind, as it always is.
Yep, absolutely. And I think, thinking about those innovative tools and technology, the other thing that comes to mind for me in the med affairs world is omni-channel engagement. So omni-channel engagement was a buzzword from a couple of years back now, but it's really meant to be, again, a central repository of resources that can easily be tweaked or easily be flexed to meet the needs of different customers, different audiences. And then also there's meant to be a digital component that brings insights back to make sure that those pieces can be updated or make sure that, performance indicators are captured. And I think that we really haven't realized that dream yet of omni-channel engagement. And I think that's sort of the next frontier for the technology, and maybe AI will help us move towards that true omni-channel engagement as well.
So what challenges do biopharma companies face when they're implementing digital engagement strategies, and then how do they overcome them?
I think the biggest challenge that I've heard as our subscribers want to leverage formulary decisions specifically is how to leverage digital engagement for both the communication of medical information, so that traditional requires an unsolicited request, reactive response to a request from one of their customer stakeholders, and more of that promotional marketing information to the same healthcare decision maker customers in a way that compliantly separates them both. So when I think back to the evolution of this platform and the things we've put in place, we recognize that we've kept that separation, and we've gone so far as not only to separate the content, but even the metrics and feedback can be separated based on the role of the user at the biopharma company. And when pharma companies are thinking of creating their own payer portals, I think they need to keep this in mind as well, to better understand who's eligible to receive that specific piece of information that they want to share.
Mm-hmm. And I think from my side, the biggest challenge, we've touched on it a few times, it's really, the fear of digital engagement and what that means for compliance and what that means for their risk level. And how can our biopharma customers get these tools and resources internally approved with buy-in from their legal, medical, regulatory, promotional committees? And I think what we've seen work in the past is really just having an open dialogue. So talk to your teams, talk internally about the risks of digital engagement and then the mitigation. So certainly, just like with any other type of engagement, there's different levels of risk. And if you have that open dialogue internally, your company can really come to a consensus about what risk they're comfortable with and what mitigation strategies they're comfortable with. And then again, write it down, have that standard procedure so that people don't have to guess, right? Make sure that everyone within your company is aligned on the execution of digital engagement and how to decrease the risk. And that way, if you can capture components that help you, report those adverse events, report quality issues, make sure you're responding to unsolicited requests for information. So really helping to engage there.
Yeah, and that's a really important point, Bridgette, because something that the platform certainly takes into consideration is this whole notion of reporting AEs. And when healthcare decision makers register for the platform, part of that registration process includes agreeing to our general terms of use. And in order to complete their registration, this includes acknowledging that this is not where they should be reporting AEs. In fact, we include a link to where they could report AEs. And then this is reinforced again when these healthcare decision makers want to complete any surveys available to them to help mitigate those risks for our biopharma companies.
So what best practices can biopharma companies adopt to ensure that their digital engagement efforts resonate, right, with the diverse HCDMs to optimize market access?
When I think about this, I think of it really as a 4-stage approach. So to help them develop and execute a plan to maximize engagement with these various stakeholders. So first, they need to ideate on a roadmap, what they want to present and when, taking into account that information needs and gaps that they need to fill, and then is aligned with where their product is at in its life cycle, because obviously what they're going to present in pre-approval is very different from what they're going to present 2-3 years post-approval, and taking into account healthcare decision maker review timelines. And then based on that strategy, they should execute that tactic by providing and presenting the materials accordingly. Obviously, they should be monitoring activity metrics and monitoring feedback along the way on the value of the content that they're providing and where there are additional information needs so that they can continue to refine that information sharing strategy. So that's really the third stage. And then finally, and I think I can't underestimate the importance of this, but they really do need to monitor key performance indicators of success with these engagements, such as what impact did this have on product perceptions, and of course, ultimately market access, and trickling all the way down to patient access to the product.
Absolutely, Laurie. I agree. And I think, we can really measure how this has gone in formulary decisions, right? So we know that our clients that have these really intentional processes and intentional approaches, they have demonstrated success. They have increased decision maker engagement with their products. They have more positive ratings of their materials when decision makers access through the platform. And they also have a larger share of product activity compared to others who are in the same market basket. So, I think that's something that can be applied to other types of digital engagement, but it's definitely this approach in particular is something that we can measure on formulary decisions and really see the success. And ultimately, these factors lead to the same goal, which is what we all have. And again, that's to improve the lives of patients. And we, in particular, do that by helping improve access to safe and effective therapies in a timely manner.
So in closing, any thoughts to, what 2025 or the future brings?
I think I think of this as like the start to an important discussion, right? And I think ultimately, Sheila, what I want our listeners to remember is that digital engagement is really important, and it certainly is the way of the future. But the second big point is you cannot lose the human touch. And we hear that over and over again. And I think a lot of people hope that digital can take over, but it really can't. We still need to have a human involved, whether it's with AI tools, whether it's with, live meetings with our decision makers. Humans are still important.
That's a really good point, Bridgette, because when I think back to when we launched in 2010 and where we're at today, we've come so far, and I know there's so much more to do, but we're always very cognizant of it does not replace that live interaction that you need and want with your customer stakeholders. And there is certain information that you absolutely want to deliver in a live environment. I think of some of those models, whether it's cost effectiveness models, budget impact models. You want to deliver those live to present a partnership with your customer stakeholders and to walk them through that process. So I don't think digital replaces live, but it is certainly a wonderful complement to ensure that you're reaching everyone where they want to be.
And that's a perfect way to end our podcast. Thank you so much, Bridgette and Laurie, for chatting with me and sharing this valuable information. As a reminder, NASP corporate members are invited to be my guest on one complimentary podcast per year. For more information about this or other NASP membership benefits and events, please feel free to reach out to membership@naspnet.org or visit our website at www.naspnet.org. Until next time, have a great day.